Hello and welcome to the Rotoworld Baseball Show. I'm your host, Eric Samulski, joined by my co-host, Scott Pianowski. Scott, we got 1 week till the All-Star break. We're seeing the middle on the horizon here. How are you feeling?
Well, as a Red Sox fan, I'm feeling great. They just took 2 out of 3 in New York. They're inside the playoff cut line right now. The Red Sox are. The Yankees are on a 5-15. Bender, that second Rafael Devers home run, I'm not sure it's landed. He hits a pitch that's nowhere near the strike zone. He pulls it to right center field. It's just, I don't know if I'm so satiated as nobody wants to hear this. I'm going to get downvoted for this, but as a New England sports fan, I'm over satiated. I just wanted like one Red Sox championship, maybe a Bruins championship growing up. And the Patriots grew into a dynasty, and the Red Sox grew into a quasi-dynasty. Obviously, the Celtics just won a championship. Thankfully, the Bruins won one in 2011. They've had a lot of near misses, but I don't need any more championships. My baseball fandom every year might be defined as much by Yankee schadenfreude as it is by the Red Sox playing well. And this year, the Red Sox have been surprisingly good. I thought the Yankees wouldn't be that good. For about 2.5 months, that prediction looked horrible. But now they look like a very flawed team. It's a top-heavy lineup. The bottom of the lineup looks really bad. There's some holes in the pitching staff, and Yankee fans are just going crazy. They want Cashman's head. They want Boone's head, and it's just fun to watch the Yankees suffer. I think I enjoy that as much as watching the Red Sox play well. It's a scrappy Red Sox team. I don't know what their upside is. I don't know if they'll do anything at the trade deadline. We'll be talking about that more this month. But I've enjoyed very much the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, I think the Red Sox are in that weird position where they could buy and sell at the same time, like get rid of some of those relievers on expiring contracts like a Jansen and a Chris Martin, and also still try to pick up like a bat or, another starter or something like that. So I'm intrigued. I will tell you from living in New York, a lot of Yankee fans, they might not be the ones that are vocal on social media, but a lot of the Yankee fans in my life kind of thought that this might happen. Maybe not to the extent that the Yankees have slowed down, but just that the lineup was way too top heavy with Soto and Aaron Judge. And, Volpe looked great at the start of the year, but like they had Verdugo hitting fourth and, Glaber just couldn't seem to figure it out. And it was just like a lot of weight put on the shoulders of two guys, and that it was maybe poor roster construction in the same way that it was a little bit of poor roster construction for the Red Sox, that like they had to move Rafaela to shortstop when Trevor Story got hurt because there was just no other possible option. And, now he's doing fine at short, but he's a much better center fielder. And so, you see this sometimes with these teams where like the depth going into a season is maybe not as great as you'd hope. And unfortunately, sometimes that just gets tested in the worst way right away. And not all teams can respond. We are going to talk about some teams and some players that have helped respond, because we're doing our waiver wire recap and our weekend, successes, who's kind of heating up. And the big story is the Minnesota Twins. Not only because of Brooks Lee, who has gotten a hit in each of the 5 games since he's been up, and not only because of Jose Miranda, who we have talked about multiple times on this show as somebody people should pick up, who tied the MLB record with hits in 12 consecutive at bats. But the Twins offense has also really come alive. They look really strong, but Brooks Lee was one of the bigger ads over the weekend. I'm just curious, what are your expectations from him? Like, should people have been picking him up and saying, this is my starting shortstop in a 12-team league? Or do you think that he's, more of a middle infield option? Is he more of a 15-team league option? How are you treating Brooks Lee right now in that rookie season?
For one thing, I'm extremely regretful. I did not realize in my TGFBI he wasn't rostered. Of course, in those leagues, you can't pick up guys who are in the minors until they come up. So for some reason that slipped through. I bid on a couple of lesser players, and then I saw not only was Lee picked up by a team, but it wasn't even that prohibitive a bid. I think if I had just put in a competitive bid, I would have won that. So that was frustrating. But Lee, so much pedigree he was hitting in the minors. It's one of those cases where I think he's just going to be good enough. He's going to force their hand. We know this is a team with a lot of movable parts. They have Willie Castro, who can play almost any position on the field. He's usually in the lineup. They have a lot of guys who need regular maintenance. They like to sit Buxton about once a week. He's having a nice comeback season. Carlos Correa's had a nice comeback season. Carlos Santana feels like he's 48. He's only 38, but he's having a really understated season. This is a really good offense, but there's a lot of players who are going to need injury rest. You're going to need some maintenance. So I would just think Lee forces his way into the lineup more often than not, and eventually somebody kind of like the pitching problem, right? We say, oh, where's this guy going to slot? And then eventually one of the pitchers gets hurt. And I don't mean to say that cavalier because it's their careers and everything. I don't wish anybody injured, but Lee's going to be Brooks Lee is going to be in the lineup on merit more often than not. And then eventually somebody's going to get hurt. They'll move Willie Castro to a new position, and Brooks Lee will be fine.
Yeah,
so, and I also want to point out that Jose Miranda, by the way, we talked about him last week. I think I called him the most underrated hitter in baseball, and since then he said, "No, I'm actually Joe DiMaggio." I don't know where that came from, but it's been really fun with him too.
Yeah, it's great to see, and like that's one of those things. You're not selling Jose Miranda right now because everybody is assuming you're trying to trade him off a hot streak, and he's been playing well. Like, no, that level is not going to keep up, but he's a good hitter, and he's made improvements in each of his 3 stints in the big leagues. And like, that's where we talk about like prospect growth not being linear. Like, no, he's not a James Wood level prospect. He's not a Brooks Lee level prospect, but he was a solid hitter in the minor leagues. And he has made improvements each time he's gotten a chance at the big league level, which is not, you can't say that for like his teammate Edouard Julian, who has not made those improvements. The strikeout rate has not gotten better. He's still a little too passive. So like, it's not a given that guys will just get better when they get more opportunities, and he's doing that. And even if he's at third with Royce Lewis out, like Brooks Lee will play second. He can slide to short when Correa gets a day off. He can DH here and there. Like, I agree with you that Brooks Lee is going to be in the lineup almost every day. I would love to see him hit a little higher than 8th. I think that would be helpful for his counting stats, and I would anticipate him moving up in the lineup if he keeps hitting like he is. We talked about this last week when he was getting called up. You're not getting the power from him that we saw this season in the minors. That 30% home run to fly ball rate is not carrying over. But if you got him this weekend, you should be really happy. If he's still available in your league somehow, you should scoop him. He's going to play every day. I had him in AL Tout Wars for a couple weeks the beginning of the season, and then when he had the reports on the back injury were that it might take a while, and I moved on, and I am kicking myself because obviously he looks great.
I want to say one other thing about this lineup, by the way. If you just take out the catchers who haven't hit much, you can slot these guys in the lineup almost anywhere you want. Like sometimes Willie Castro hits 8th, sometimes he hits 1st. Byron Buxton can hit almost anywhere. Miranda's bounced around the lineup. Lee has, been in the bottom 3rd, but he eventually is going to percolate somewhere higher. And also Jose Miranda, by the way, just turned 26. I don't know why it felt like he was 28 or 29. Yeah. I guess the point is that there's an age where you're no longer thought of as a prospect. You're past that point. And I guess he got past that age, and I immediately advanced him up a couple more years. And then I realized, he just turned 26. So, and you underscore, I want to say it again, just prospect development not being linear. That's of course we see players in their 30s almost always when players' careers start to deteriorate, that is linear, but the way up is often it's kind of like when you're flying a plane. When you get seated in seat 16C, you're on an aisle, and they bounce around for a while, and then they find that comfortable cruising height, cruising altitude. And that's kind of what prospect development is. It's a little bumpy at times, but it's not always linear.
I actually really like that analogy. I've never heard it before, so I'll say you invented it, and it's a good analogy. The other big story from the weekend was what was happening with Yu Darvish. So Yu Darvish was placed on. We know that he's been battling an injury, and he was on the IL, but Yu Darvish was placed on the restricted list over the weekend, which means he's not being paid as he attends to a personal matter, is what the Padres have said. Right now, we don't really know details. There was a story in the San Diego Union Tribune this weekend that said, quote, "There's a legitimate chance Darvish returns this season. There's also a very real chance he does not," end quote. It's not a legal issue. It's just something that is involving his family, and it's up to him when he returns. Obviously, from a human level, we hope that everything is okay with his family, and hope he takes whatever time he needs. We don't have any details on that, and that's his private business, and we don't need details on that. But from a fantasy perspective, we kind of need to know, like, are you waiting this out? Are you not? What are we doing here? I took the tack where like, this is the last week before the All-Star break. It's the last full week. And then we get just a short week next week. So I kept Yu Darvish in all leagues where I have him, because I figured I'll keep him on my bench for 1 week. Hopefully we'll find out a little bit more information, a timeline or whatever. If he's not starting next week in my abbreviated week, like I'm not, it's not a big deal for me. But it gives me an extra week to kind of make an informed decision. But I think there's a very real chance, if we still don't have a timeline, you have to move on from Darvish, who's also potentially not 100% healthy. Now that we know it's an arm issue too that he's dealing with, it's all question marks that are concerning.
Yeah, I'm looking at his baseball reference page. What a strange career Yu Darvish has had. I mean, he joins the Rangers in his mid-20s. He makes 3 straight All-Star teams. He can finish his second in the Cy Young voting his second year. He leads the league in strikeouts with 277, which is a monstrous total. Has Tommy John. I believe it was Tommy John. He missed the entire 2015 season. Since then, he's only made 2 All-Star teams. He's only charted in 2 Cy Young award votings, and one of them was the pandemic season, which is almost like not even a real season. He finished second that year, but he's never won a Cy Young or been really all that close to it. And it feels like every year there's injury. Every year he's been just kind of a mystery guy. I'm never surprised when he pitches great. I'm never surprised when he allows 7 runs. I'm never surprised when something unusual pops into his life. And again, we're human here. I hope everything's okay with what's going on. We don't want to speculate on it. That's kind of the Yu Darvish experience. I feel like there's always a shroud of mystery with him, and I never know what the right call is. I could say, oh yeah, you got to hold him, and then we could be saying at the end of the year, well, that didn't turn into anything. He didn't come back, or he came back and he pitched poorly. Or I could say, well, yeah, you got to try to trade him, or you got to try to cut him, whatever, and then maybe he leads the Padres into a playoff charge. The Padres are right now inside the playoff cut line. They're a team. I don't think they're great, but they're probably going to make the playoffs. So this, if he was on a team that wasn't going anywhere, you'd think, well, maybe he just takes the season off, or that's just less incentive to come back anyway. I don't know. I have no good takes on Yu Darvish. I feel like we're always kind of flying blind on this guy.
Yeah, I love that you talk about the scope of his career. Yu Darvish has pitched 12 years in the big leagues, and we know that he also had a career before coming here. So it's super interesting for him. I don't know. I mean, we know he's not the same level of pitcher that he was in some of those Cy Young or some of the years in the mid 2000s. I can see if you really need starts, in a lot of these shallow bench leagues, and now he can't be placed on the IL since he's on the restricted list. You only get really like one stash. And I'm not sure Yu Darvish is that guy without any clear timeline.
You know how many career wins he has?
Well, I have his baseball reference page open when I was looking, so I'm cheating. But yeah, it's 107.
If you told me in 2012 when he won 16 games, or even after those first 3 seasons, knowing he'd miss a season with Tommy John, that he would still be pitching at his age 37 season, and he'd have 100, and that speaks to just wins are becoming less and less part of the starting rotation. These guys don't go as deep. Are you a kill the win guy? Do you prefer quality starts? Are you just a 5x5 roto guy? What's your stance?
Honestly, my home league has tried to get rid of wins for a few years, and we've tried to brainstorm what to do to replace it, and we've never landed on anything that's like a clear, better option. We've talked about quality starts, but that is not as good anymore with pitchers not going deep. We've talked about just like overall innings pitched, and getting value in starting pitchers who go deeper into games. We've talked about a bunch of things, and like maybe we'll just experiment with something one day, but there's nothing that stands out to me as like a glaringly better course.
That's well said. One of my head-to-head leagues is like a hybrid 7x7 or 8x8 league. And one of the categories, I think we have innings and quality starts in there. So again, the guys who are giving you some kind of depth, quality start. There's a problem with everything. Like people are always like, we should kill the save. Holds are better, or saves and holds are better. And the hold is a garbage stat. The save is a garbage stat. Saves and holds is just a combination of garbage. I've learned just to kind of accept that saves are what they are, wins are what they are, and the bottom line is you're still just trying to make the best decisions you can, with the understanding that you need fewer wins to be competitive anyway, because everybody's getting fewer wins.
Right. Yeah, it is It's interesting. It'll be an interesting like inflection point to see how we make these adjustments in the future. We'll go through a couple news and notes before we get to our waiver wire stuff. We got some quick things here. 3 outfielders who have been on our rosters before and been in our hearts before were called back up this weekend. We got James Outman, Matt Wallner, and Parker Meadows all back at the big league level. Unfortunately, Parker Meadows hurt his hamstring in his first game. And the quotes from Tigers manager AJ Finch are not great. He said, and I quote, "I don't love what I heard from the get-go in talking to him and our trainers. It's something with the hamstring that's always alarming." We don't have a timeline on Parker Meadows, but I think right now you're not picking him up because that, he only had 1 game back up, and then that quote seems to suggest a lengthy absence for a team that's not competing this year and won't rush him back. So my question to you, James Outman, Matt Wallner, were you interested in either of those guys again?
I just don't see where Wallner plays in that very deep Minnesota offense. And Outman, he was just so bad earlier this year. I thought he was an okay offensive player last year, but not great. 113 OPS plus. The player, and that's of course AJ Hinch is the manager of the Tigers. The player on the Tigers I was picking up this week was Cole Keith, but
yeah,
I would have been in on Parker Meadows. Parker Meadows didn't get hurt. Once he got hurt, it just took him off the script. So I can't really give you any optimism on these 3 outfielders right now.
Yeah. I had Parker Meadows bids in and I had to delete them all. He was the one I wanted most out of these 3. Matt Wallner has really been good in June, but there's just no space for him. There's no space for Wallner in that lineup. I know that like even against righties, I just don't see how he plays every day. Buxton and Kepler and Larnach are set every day in the outfield. You've got Santana now kind of DHing a decent amount, Miranda DHing a decent amount. The only option is if they were to push like Willie Castro out of the lineup and put Brooks Lee at second and let Miranda play third and then have Wallner DH. It just feels like a part-time spot for me. I was happy to take some gambles on Outman in certain leagues. Was hitting 280 at AAA with 9 home runs and 7 steals in 38 games. Walk rate was up at 13%. The strikeout rate was still around 26%. I think that's always going to be him. But again, even hitting 250 last year, 23 homers, 16 steals. So if he is a 240, 250 hitter, he has the power and speed in that lineup to be interesting especially in deeper formats. So I took some low money gambles, but I'm not expecting I'm getting some major breakout star here. It was like, for example, I swapped out Garrett Mitchell, who we talked about and we liked, for James Outman because the Brewers haven't been playing Garrett Mitchell against lefties early on. And so I was thinking I'm getting 2 guys who are basically like power speed type of hitters who are only going to face righties in their lineups. Outman is at a better lineup, has more power speed potential, but worse batting average. And I took the gamble on Outman in some of those leagues, but I think kind of that's like in the range where we're going for. I'm not expecting some sort of second half breakout here.
Right. And as you said, Outman, when they faced the lefty on Sunday, he was on the bench. So this is very format dependent. You'd probably have to be in a 15-team league where you consider it. That's where these Mitchell, Outman, that's where these guys are probably in your line of sight, where in a 10 or 12-team league, you can probably ignore them for now.
Yeah. The Nationals made a few moves this weekend. They designated Joey Meneses for assignment, and they DFA'd Nick Senzel. They called up Juan Yepez to take Meneses' spot, and Trey Lipscomb to take Senzel's spot. So it feels like Yepez and Lipscomb will be everyday players in the lineup for the Nationals for the near future. I'm curious if you have any interest. Lipscomb has been up before. Yepez was hitting 263 with 11 home runs in 74 games at AAA. Did have a 12.5% walk rate and 14% strikeout rate. So lots of contact, even though the batting average, was 263 in AAA, which isn't great. Yepez has flashed before in the majors. Do you care about either of these guys outside of like NL only formats?
Yeah, maybe in the deeper leagues. Lipscomb was running a little bit too when he came up. I think he was on my NL tout roster for a minute earlier in the season. And just Washington, just exciting to see. Meneses, Senzel, they're not part of like the next Washington contending team. And in the last week, they've called up Wood, who's an exciting player, and they have Abrams, who's playing really well. Lane Thomas stealing a bunch of bases. He's a little bit of a flawed player, but he's not a bad player. Mackenzie Gore's had a breakout year. Their whole staff is, I think, overperformed. They've had decent late bullpen work as well. This is just kind of like a fun team that I think maybe is just like a year or two away from being a legitimate playoff contender. It's probably not going to come this year, but I could see them being in the playoffs next year as like a wild card team for sure. I'm excited to see them moving forward with trying to get younger and trying to be more proactive. And there wasn't going to be a trade market for the guys that they cut, so I understand that. I could see deeper leagues, Yepez or Lipscomb. Yeah, I could see having some interest in them. They're probably going to have to produce. They're probably a week. It's like latent waivers on them. You'll see what they do for a few days, and maybe next week we'll be talking about them, or they'll be picked up en masse. So probably don't have to do it speculatively, but this is an offense and a team that I've been auditing closely all year. I think there've been a lot of underappreciated assets on this team.
One of them was DJ Herz, who the Nationals just demoted, which I was surprised by because even though his last start wasn't good, he has flashed before. There's some strikeout upside. It's a team that wasn't really going anywhere this year. I think he'll get a chance again in the second half, but he was demoted and Yohan Adon was called up. I think you have to drop Herz in most formats outside of like NL only formats where you might want to hold on to him for a little bit. I think he gets a call later, but it was not clicking right now, and they're surprisingly going to go with another option who has also not shown much or has shown way less at the MLB level.
It's weird because Herz had that 10 strikeout game and that 13 strikeout game, and you just don't see a lot of those from anybody in baseball right now. Nobody goes that deep, but the strikeout stuff was there. I mean, the ERA was also over 5, so I get why they did this, but it's just weird to see somebody hit the high end of their range a couple of times and not that many starts, but not consistent enough to keep a spot.
Another interesting team is the Cardinals. Tommy Edman is starting a rehab assignment on Tuesday. Lars Nootbaar was just activated today. My question to you is just like, how do you think this all plays out with the Cardinals? Nootbaar seems like he's going to be the everyday center fielder again. Michael Ciani is an easy, choice to go to the bench. But after that, like when Edman comes back, who loses playing time? Does Edman lose playing time? Does Alec Burleson lose playing time? Brendan Donovan, Nolan Gorman? Like, who do you think is most in jeopardy here?
It's probably easy for them to turn Donovan into a super utility player because he plays a bunch of different positions. This has been a team, along with the Reds, this has been the team, the lineup that's just puzzled me the most because it's different every day and people play different positions. And the Cardinals are kind of a fraud too. They've been outscored, I think, by like 30 or 40 runs, but somehow they're over 500 right now. They would be a playoff team. I'm still not really convinced that they're any good. If I were them, I would actually sell and try to get better down the road and not be trying to scrape into the playoffs this year. And I hope they can self-scout themselves and see that they're really a team that's a little bit in decline. Obviously Goldschmidt and Arenado on the back nines of their, possible Hall of Fame careers. But it may be a case where they just treat it as like, okay, we have 10 or 11 guys who are viable starters. Let's just play everybody with the exception of a couple of players like 5 or 6 days a week. And whoever hits stays in the lineup. Whoever doesn't, moves to the bottom of the pile. I think they might just play hot hand. It's like we say in fantasy football, like there's like a 3-man backfield. It might just be a hot hand situation. I think this is kind of what they're going to do with this offense where, say Edman comes back and he goes 2 for 18. Okay, then maybe he doesn't play for the weekend or something like that. I think it could be a hot hand situation for the offense because, again, the pieces, a lot of movable pieces. And I think somebody probably gets traded by this team in July.
Yeah, I was going to say this is not even considering like Jordan Walker coming back up and things like that. So I think there's another piece moved here. It could be bad news for Nolan Gorman, whose power has been really good, but is striking out a lot, and the batting average is terrible. And he could see a few more starts on the bench if that doesn't pick up. I'm curious to see how that plays out. And then the other team I wanted to just touch on before we get to the weekend waiver stuff is the Rangers. Report came out from Ken Rosenthal that the Rangers Since they're 7.5 games out of the playoffs right now, they have just about a 10% chance to make the playoffs. They could look to deal guys on expiring contracts like Max Scherzer, who has a full no trade clause, so he would need to accept that. Andrew Heaney, Kirby Yates, David Robertson, Michael Lorenzen are some of the names that were mentioned. The starting staff makes sense. Tyler Mahle is making his second rehab start this weekend. So Mahle and Jacob deGrom could return in the second half of the year. Cody Bradford could return. So there is a possibility that the Rangers replenish their starting rotation if they dealt Heaney and Lorenzen. My question to you is, like, if you're in desperate need of saves, right? Even if the Rangers are trading, they're not trading away Corey Seager, Marcus Semien, right? They're Wyatt Langford. Their offense will still be solid. So there are still going to be some save opportunities. If Yates and Robertson are gone, is there a spec ad that you could see in this bullpen of somebody adding in the coming weeks that might get saves in the second half of the year? And are we going to tell people to add Jose Leclerc again because we've been down that road again?
I heard your voice kind of perking up. I'm like, here comes the Jose Leclerc conversation. I hope it's somebody else. I don't think I have it in my stomach to dance with Jose Leclerc again. What a strange organization. Okay, the last 8 seasons, including this year, the Texas Rangers have had a winning record one season, and they won the World Series. That was last year. Every other season, they've had a losing record. That covers 4 or 5 different managers, including Bochy, who's the 5th manager in that group. So it feels like the Rangers are always trying to figure something out. They decide to spend a bunch of money. They brought in Seager, who's great. They brought in Semien. I'm a big fan. They made the investment in deGrom, and kind of predictably, he got hurt right away. What a shame. I think people forget how dominant he was, like at the peak of his Mets career at the very end. His whip was like 0.55 or something like that. I wonder if the slump of the team is going to disincentivize deGrom to pitch this year. I have no idea. Yeah. He's on one of my keeper league teams, and I'm always looking. We have Devin Williams too. It's like, well, there's always a Devin Williams update. It's like once a week you guys are giving us something at Rotoworld. I realize you can only work on what's released. deGrom has been kind of that mystery guy I talked about with Darvish earlier. I just every once in a while there's a deGrom note, but they're very close to the vest on that. And I don't know if deGrom would just be happy to pitch. He wouldn't care if it was in contention or not. I don't know what Scherzer's going to do. As you mentioned, the no trade clause. It feels like Max Scherzer won't be happy until he pitches for every team in baseball, probably. Sure. Maybe he'd rather be in one place. He signed with the Mets. It didn't work out. He's on the Rangers now. They're not going anywhere. So is Max Scherzer on the Yankees? Is Max Scherzer on the Braves? Is Max Scherzer on the Dodgers again? I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen with that. But
yeah.
As you mentioned, the key, one of the keys to this, and why we're going to have to care if their bullpen gets shuffled, is that they're not a horrible team.
Right.
I think it's actually a plus offense no matter what. And, you mentioned Langford. Of course, he started to hit. He had a couple of big games this past week. This is not a lookout below team, and who the heck knows? Maybe they go 11-2 or something and get back in the race. I think they're smart to consider tearing some of this down. At least, Max Scherzer isn't on their next great team. I get it. Kirby Yates is a guy who you've put value. You've inflated his tires by making him a closer again. He's a good pitcher. He's an older pitcher. He's 37 or 38, something like that. David Robertson, old. These are the guys you should be trading, right? They're not part of your next great team, but it's not going to be all of a sudden they're the Marlins or they're the White Sox or something. We have to take their bullpen seriously. I just telling you, I don't have it. Jose Leclerc, if he becomes viable again, it's not going to be for me.
Yeah, I will say I totally agree with you. Since June 1st, he is 3rd on the team in average game leverage index, which means he's behind only Robertson and Yates in terms of the highest leverage innings that are being pitched. And also, to be fair, over that stretch, again, we're talking about since June 1st, that's 14 innings pitched for Jose Leclerc. He has a 2.57 ERA, a 38.2% strikeout rate, and just a 9% walk rate. We've seen him flash like this before. It's the consistency that's the issue, but I do think that he's the guy who would get the first shot if those two are traded. A couple quick hitters to round this out. David Festa was sent back to AAA by the Twins over the weekend. It is Chris Paddock, who was activated off the IL today, Monday. He'll start against the White Sox. If you're in weekly lineup lock leagues, that's a 2-start week, which also means that he is going to get, I'm saying this as I'm looking it up to make sure, he's going to get the Giants over the weekend, which is a meh matchup. White Sox, obviously a good matchup, makes him a little bit of a tough play. Kyle Schwarber is expected to be back on Tuesday, but that's not confirmed yet. So that could be tough for weekly lineup lock leagues, but something to keep an eye on. Jeffrey Springs was up to 62 pitches in his last rehab start for the Rays, with the Rays already trading Aaron Savali. We talked about the fact that they could trade Eflin or Zach Littell and put Springs in the rotation again. It might take a couple more rehab starts, but he looked good over 4 innings. Clayton Kershaw is starting his rehab assignment again this week. We've talked about the risk in whether he actually can make it back or not, but he's trying. Yimi Garcia is expected to be activated off his rehab assignment this week by the Blue Jays and should get right back into the closer mix in Toronto, but is also a name to watch on the trade deadline. So don't go spending crazy money on him because he could be activated and then traded in 2 weeks back to just a normal setup role. The Angels say Anthony Rendon could return today. Everything is a could with Anthony Rendon. We have no idea, or no idea how long he stays active. That could mean Keston Hiura goes back to AAA. I just bid on him in AL Tout Wars, so I hope not, but who knows? Matt McClain was cleared for baseball activities by the Reds. Again, that's still going to be, they're still targeting August for his return. It's going to be a build up for him to get back into game shape, and then he has to play rehab games. So Matt McClain is not returning imminently, but he gets to start swinging and stuff, which is great. The Reds made a move for Austin Slater overnight. Austin Slater, is a really good right-handed hitter against lefties. The Reds are very kind of left-handed heavy in the outfield with guys like Nick Martini, who's hurt now, Stuart Fairchild, Edwin Rios is DHing for them. So Slater figures to start pretty regularly against lefties and could move into a bigger role. Yilber Diaz is debuting for the Arizona Diamondbacks today. It's a really tough 2-start week. So people I do not recommend picking him up in most formats. You do not want a rookie in a 2-start week against the Braves and the Blue Jays. Even though the Blue Jays offense has taken a step back, you still don't really want that, but a guy to watch. Also in Arizona, Jordan Lawler has started his rehab assignment at the Complex League. But what's interesting is that Jordan Lawler has started his rehab assignment by playing third base, which could signal the desire of the Diamondbacks to get him up and possibly push Eugenio Suarez in the second half of the year. So that is something to keep an eye on. And then the Cleveland Guardians called up Angel Martinez, who is one of their top prospects, and he's played regularly since they came up. However, we should just note that 3 of their last 4 games, they faced a left-handed pitcher. Martinez is a right-handed hitter, so he has started the last 4 games. But again, 3 of them were against lefties, and then he started at third base on Sunday when they had Jose Ramirez DH. So we don't really know how much playing time Angel Martinez is going to get, but he is up and he is playing. Name to keep an eye on because he's actually been hitting second in the Guardians lineup. So if they do keep him up and he's hitting that high in the order, would be interesting in fantasy leagues. Anything for you on those before we move on?
Yeah, just a couple of quick things. In addition to Schwarber, it sounds like Bryce Harper might be back this week, and I'm known for my fading injury optimism, but those rules go out the window for Bryce Harper, who has beat comeback timetables before. Holding out hope we might see some Bryce Harper before the All-Star break. Of course, there's no incentive because the Phillies are cruising to a playoff spot anyway, but I'm keeping the good thought there. You mentioned Matt McClain, and to me, that just makes me more nervous about Noelvi Marte, who's 150, 171, 250 slash since he came back. He's got 1 walk. He's got 14 strikeouts. That's basically the walk strikeout rate he was showing in the minors, too, for his little bit of tune-up. I'm just really nervous that at some point he's going to be the odd guy out. He's going to go back to the minors, although if he's not hitting, he's not fantasy relevant anyway. And you mentioned the Angels. I just want to – we probably talked about this before, but just in passing, I just want to celebrate how the Angels have become this misfit island of players. It's like, oh, Willie Calhoun. Oh, Kevin Pillar. Oh, Aaron Hicks was on the team at one point. Cole Tucker got some at-bats for them. Nico Goodrum here, who might be going back to the minors. If you don't know if a guy's in baseball or not, and the answer is yes, he's probably hiding in the Angels organization somewhere, and he'll probably need to play because they've had so many injuries. At least our preseason boy, Zach Neto, has started to really play well of late. Brandon Drury's back. He hasn't hit at all, but I'd really like him to pick it up so he could be one of those 3 or 4 position guys you can play. I had a moment for Joe Adell. I've given up on that. Right now, it looks like he shouldn't even be in the lineup, but he's only there because guys are hurt. But it's just so crazy that for the entire time they had Trout and Ohtani, they never had a winning record, but at least they had Trout when he was healthy, and they had Ohtani. And now it's just like, oh yeah, the Mickey Moniak show. Logo Hoppy's had a nice breakout season. I know DJ Short's always been no Hoppy guy, probably an all-star snub as well. He's maybe the best. And Luis Rengifo, who's maybe their best player too, he just got hurt, so he's on the IL. But the Angels, man, you need to buy a scorecard when you go to an Angels game. Because and again, you're going to be, oh yeah, okay, I remember that. I had that guy on my fantasy roster like 6 years ago. Now he's on the Angels.
Yeah, it is fun to watch. It's not great maybe for for like if you're a fan of the team, but it is fun to watch.
And what a great streaming target too. They're like, I think they're one of the 5 best. Maybe they're not the White Sox or the Marlins, but they're one of the 5 best streaming
up there for sure. Yeah, the Bryce Harper thing is interesting because I think if they weren't playing the Dodgers this week, they wouldn't really rush to get him back. But again, they play the Dodgers Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, which is why he's in contention. So something to watch there. If your lineups lock on Monday, it's tough because I don't think we're going to know until Tuesday, but you decide if you take that gamble or not. We're going to get to this weekend's top waiver wire picks and stars. Before we do that though, you can tune in and watch the toughest cycling race of the year today through July 21st. The world's top cyclists compete for a chance to wear the yellow jacket in the Tour de France. You can stream it on Peacock again today going through July 21st. One of the biggest or the biggest ad in leagues where he was available over the weekend was James Wood. Went for up to $600 in some NFBC formats. Obviously, if you didn't have to wait till Sunday night to pick him up, he was picked up in almost all leagues. He's over 70% rostered right now on Yahoo. I believe it will be trending up even more in the coming days. Just curious if you had any opportunities to get James Wood over the weekend. If you tried, he was available in 2 of my online championships in NFBC, which are 12-team leagues. It's $1,000 fab budget. I have just under $500 in each of those leagues. I put bids of like $240 and I didn't get him. So I thought I put pretty aggressive bids down. And people were throwing, over 30% of their full season fab budget on him. And I can see why he's looked good at the start of the year, his start to the year. So yeah, did you get any James Wood?
Sadly, not on any of my rosters. He wasn't available. I don't think anywhere for me to bid on him. And I believe, I know we talked a lot about it hasn't been a great rookie season. If you don't count the Japanese pitchers who came over with a high level of experience, it's been a great year to fade a lot of the rookie players. But Wood comes up. Okay, first 7 games. For one thing, they put him in the middle of the lineup right away. None of this, you're going to bat 8th and prove it thing. And okay, 320, 452, 480 slash. He's got a homer. He's got a stolen base. That all speaks for itself. What impresses me the most, he's got 6 walks and 7 strikeouts. He's already got a command of the strike zone. And also he passes the grandmother test, which is if you took somebody who is, not that many grandmothers don't love baseball, but if you took somebody who was not a baseball fan to the ballpark and said, okay, pick out the hot prospect this team just called up, like the star player they're excited about. And we talked about the Nationals. There's a lot of guys on their team they're excited about, but they would immediately point to James Wood and say, it's him, right? Of course it's him. He identifies himself just by the way he fills up the uniform and just his approach at the plate, that even if you weren't a sophisticated baseball fan, you'd immediately identify him. I'm convinced he's going to be great right away. I think he's already shown it. Again, that goes against the trend of rookies this year, but it's going to be no fun having no stake in him. Maybe I'll have to take some props with James Wood down the stretch because I need to have a piece of this too.
Yeah, it looks fun. I'm happy for it. I didn't think it was going to happen, but I'm happy for Nationals fans. I'm happy for baseball fans. They'll be a pretty good team in maybe even as soon as next year. One of the other biggest ads was somebody we've talked about before. It's Rowdy Tellez.
You're right.
Over the last month, Rowdy Tellez is the 34th ranked hitter on the Fangraphs player rater in 78 plate appearances. He's hitting .342 with 16 RBIs, 13 runs, 6 home runs. He added 1 stolen base for good measure. He is just barreling the ball 6.7% of the time on the year. The pull rate is the lowest it's been in 3 years. The fly ball rate is the lowest it's been since his rookie year. So a lot more ground balls and line drives for Rowdy Tellez. I don't know how sustainable it is, but like I scooped him in a couple 15-team leagues. I feel like he's hitting every day, and we've seen him produce solid fantasy stats before. So maybe he keeps it up for the short term.
Yeah, you were talking him up the last time we spoke, and I poo-pooed it, and I regretted it. I needed Tellez on a team. Maybe I lost Harper or somebody else at corner. I was actually had to take a zero or had to take an empty spot for a few days. And I'm like, okay, well, what can I get? Okay, Rowdy Tellez. Who's going to fight me for Rowdy Tellez? And somebody fought me for Rowdy Tellez. So I didn't even get Tellez. Yeah, in fact, it might have been you for all I know. But it's you talked about the ground ball rate and the pull, some of his under the hood stats. I wonder where his trend is at, because you look at he was abysmal in April, and he was in May hitting under 200. His slugging was anemic, and then since then 333, 380, 546 slash in June, and then he's been terrific. He's hitting over 400 in July. He's got 6 home runs in his last about 90 at bats.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. Maybe he's figured something out. Maybe he's made a mechanical change. I don't know. All I know is right now Rowdy Tellez is performing like a bona fide major league player, like somebody who over a full season I would expect to hit 25 home runs or so and hit for a playable average. Obviously, the stolen base was a fluke, but in a 13 to 15 team mixed league, yeah, he's very rosterable. I think you were in on this last week, and I regret not following your lead on that.
Yeah, I didn't. I mean, I still am. I question, the long-term power output of a guy hitting the ball in the air less and pulling the ball less and hitting the ball with just a 6.7% barrel rate, which is the lowest he has in his career. And again, we know it's a poor lineup. So like 13 RBIs when you have 6 home runs is not great. But again, like in deeper formats, 15-team leagues, I'm happy to take the chance right now. I don't know how long it holds, but hitting in the middle of the order and hitting is important, which is also something to say about the next guy we have on here, who's Ben Rice, who is the 65th ranked player, not just hitter, player in standard 5x5 formats over the last 2 weeks. What's interesting to note here is he started leading off for the Yankees. Obviously, we saw the huge game in the second game of the Red Sox series where he hit 3 home runs, drove in 7 RBIs. He only had 1 hit in the 2 games besides that. But if you now have a guy who has shown himself acclimated well, at the big league level, the plate discipline looks really good, 273 average, not striking out a lot, getting on base a lot, which is why the Yankees put him leadoff. And if you're going to lead off ahead of Juan Soto and Aaron Judge, that is going to help your fantasy value. And the fact that he's catcher eligible too, like this guy should be a starting catcher in all 12-team leagues right now. He's just 53% rostered in Yahoo formats. It should be higher. And I think if he's going to lead off, like I could start him at corner infield, even in a 12-team league right now, because I think the fantasy production with those 2 guys behind him could be pretty good given how much he gets on base.
Yeah, you checked off just about all the key points here. He's actually chased up to 58% now on Yahoo and 20% in the last day. So a lot of it was a big reaction to the 3-homer game. The 2 positions of eligibility, obviously catcher is gigantically important, and the proximity to the 2 Yankees that we care about in that lineup, Soto and Judge. And I'm sad to see Anthony Volpe, for merit, dropped out of the leadoff spot, but I would think Ben Rice has a chance to hold that spot for the rest of the year.
Yeah, and I said when he came up that I didn't think the batting average would be that high because he was running a really high BABIP, and the contact rates weren't great in AAA. And that's in part been true. I mean, he is hitting well, but he's the batting average, around 270. And that's with a few of these like big games, but the pull side power is real. And the plate discipline has always been really good. And so I think that really boosts his stock to a certain extent, because he's always going to, again, getting on base in that spot in the lineup. Right. This is when he was hitting 7th, him just getting on base was kind of like, oh, fine, whatever. He's just getting on base. But him hitting 1st and getting on base drastically changes his fantasy value. So that's something that's super interesting.
It's cool that you see different types of leadoff hitters that you would never see in the old days, where it used to be, okay, who's the fast outfielder you had? right? I mean, I think of like some of the old Red Sox teams where they'd have like their two worst hitters, but the 1978 Red Sox had their two worst hitters probably, or at least their worst hitter, Rick Burleson, batting first. He should have been batting ninth, but that like Kyle Schwarber, right? He never would have. You would have like, oh, he has to bat cleanup, right? Or if you don't like his average, you move him lower in the lineup. No, it's like he gets on base constantly. Of course, he should be batting leadoff. It's just nice to see that baseball has figured that out. They have much more optimal lineups than they used to have.
Speaking of speedy outfielders, but not ones who hit leadoff, but Leody Taveras has picked it up of late. He is the 73rd ranked hitter in baseball over the last 2 weeks. He's made just 42 plate appearances, but over that time he's hitting 400 with 4 steals, 4 runs and 5 RBIs. So he's not getting a lot in terms of the runs and RBIs. Again, we talked about the offense in Texas was scuffling a little bit. But again, like this is a guy, Leody Taveras, who was kind of like an afterthought coming into the year because everybody wanted Evan Carter to play and everybody wanted Wyatt Langford to play. And everybody knew Adolis Garcia was going to play. And so there wasn't really room for Taveras in people's minds, but he's just 25 years old. Last year, he hit 266 with 14 homers and 14 steals in 143 games. He has 10 steals in 85 games. He's cut the strikeout rate on the year down to 18% with the walk rate up to 9%. Those are both the best marks he's shown in his career. Do you think that there could be a little bit of, not like a breakout, but a little bit of just fantasy improvement from a 25-year-old hitting in a decent lineup who could go back to being a useful, not tremendous, but useful fantasy player with plus speed?
Open-minded to this Taveras thing having legs. You mentioned the category juice last year. He's not Ken Griffey Jr., he's not Devon White, but he's a capable defensive player. He's a switch hitter too, so there's no platoon concerns. I think it's going to be a plus lineup the rest of the way. Anytime anybody has power speed, I'm going to consider them. I mean, Harrison Bader is like, going to hit for a poor average, but I'm always thinking about playing him because I might need the stolen bases, and he occasionally hits a home run. And that's kind of the type of player that Taveras is too, and maybe in a better lineup. There's no floor here, right? I mean, he could go back to being a part-time player, but because what we've seen before with his resume, with that category juice, with enough defense to justify being in the lineup and no handedness concerns, this is a player I'd like you to be a week early on, and you kick the tires on and see where it goes.
Yep. And Evan Carter's still a couple weeks away at best. And he might take some minor league games because he wasn't playing really well before. So there's no imminent threat there. We were really in on Luis Garcia Jr., the Nationals second baseman, early in the year. He struggled a little bit at the start of June. At the end of May, people hopped off. He was down under 30% rostered in Yahoo formats for a while. He has been tremendous over the last month. Over the last 30 days, he is the 39th ranked hitter in standard 5x5 formats, hitting 299 with 14 runs scored, 18 RBIs, 5 homers, and 4 steals. But he's up to just 41% rostered in Yahoo formats. I feel like we need to be jumping back in on this a little more aggressively. No, I mean, like he's shown that he is making improvements. Another guy who is a young player who was not, didn't hit the ground running when he first got a shot at 20 years old, but he's just 24. He's hitting 277 on the year with 10 homers and 12 steals. Like he could push to be a 2020 guy, at least like a 15-20 guy while hitting 270. Like that has fantasy value in all formats.
Yeah, it does. One of my teams, we had Luis Garcia. The slump came in. I think we've got to cut him for Nick Gonzalez, who we've since cut for Colt Keith. So we're just playing second base roulette, and I've gotten the timing on it wrong all season. But I mean, for the year, Luis Garcia, OPS plus a 115, where it's indexed to 100 as league average. I mean, he's an above average offensive player who has some power, probably more home runs than he does raw power, but I mean, he has some power and he runs, and he's on a team that wants to run. I mean, what's not to like here? I know he's not hitting in maybe the slot that we want. Now that Thomas is back, he's never going to hit first or second on this team, but so what? This is a plus offensive player, and a player that I cut too quickly, and maybe I need to be more patient with some guy. Maybe he showed enough in the secondary metrics that I should have given him another week or two before I cut him. And the sad thing is he stayed on my waiver wire for a long time. He was recently picked up by a team a week ago, and now it's like, okay, cat's out of the bag. Hopefully Keith can make me feel better. But Luis Garcia is underrepresented in Yahoo for sure.
Yeah, and Colt Keith has been playing much better of late as well. So again, that's somebody who I think that's a pretty solid play for you. Again, young guys who may have some cold stretches here and there, but like the overall talent is going to suggest a level of performance. Speaking of young players, I want to talk to you about Heston Kjerstad because he was added in a decent number of leagues, but not a lot over the weekend. He's still just 38% rostered in Yahoo formats. He's played 10 games since being called back up again. He's hitting 367 in those 10 games with 3 home runs, 4 runs, and 12 RBIs. But people are obviously hesitant to pick him back up because the playing time is still not full time. Over in the last week that we just saw, Kjerstad made a few more starts than normal because Ryan Mountcastle was sick. But I don't know that there's full-time playing time here. There's still Colton Cowser in the mix. There's still Austin Hayes in the mix. There's still obviously Cedric Mullins, Anthony Santander. Like, do you think Kjerstad is going to play? Do you think that he's good enough that we should just pick him up and put him on our bench and hope he gets a job?
That's probably the last thing you said is probably what I would do. I mean, 295, 392, 545 slash speaks for itself. And if he might need a break, it might need to be somebody has to get hurt, or maybe they get tired of Mullins' bat, although he's really the best pure center fielder on the roster. But I just love this lineup. It's just filled with plus hitters. I think we talked a lot about the Red Sox and the Yankees at the front of the show, but I mean, Baltimore is so obviously the best team in this division. It's just kind of nice to have my priors backed up by them zooming past the Yankees like a parked car. And I think the Orioles are going to win this division by like 7, 8, 10 games when the season is over. It's just one of those lineups you want something, right? You hope maybe you got Westberg off free agency, or maybe you're lucky enough to draft Gunnar Henderson, who could be the American League MVP right now. Rutschman is probably at the top of the catcher list. Just quiet veterans like Santander and O'Hearn have been really useful. I want a piece of this offense. Kjerstad, exciting prospect in mid-20s. He just needs a chance to play. I mean, free Heston Kjerstad.
Free him. We'll talk about some pitchers that we hope to free off of waiver wires. But before we do that, we're going to look at my freezing TV screen. Before we do that, Friday, July 26th marks the opening ceremony of the Olympic Games in Paris. Watch Simone Biles and more elite American athletes compete for gold on NBC and Peacock. We've talked about this for a long time leading up to the Olympics. We're super excited. You and I know we love the Olympics. Obviously everybody at NBC Sports does, but we're super close to it, and I'm ready to go. I'm ready for some Olympics right now.
Oh, for sure. It's and Paris, man. You can't have a better venue. I mean, what a great time for the world to convene and see some world-class athletic performance, and just the variety of sports too. Even golf is an Olympic sport now, so there's a lot going on.
Yeah, no, it's going to be great. Some of the big waiver wire ads I want to talk about. Shane Baz. We've been talking about him as he was trending up. He went 6 innings in his debut. They let him throw over 90 pitches. He struck out 6. It wasn't a perfect outing against Texas, but I personally am encouraged by his ability to throw 90 plus pitches. I feel like I made some big bids on him in NFBC. Again, didn't get him, but I feel like people should be adding him wherever they can. No?
I do. I think that the name I don't see on the script who actually went deep in his first game back was Dean Kremer. And I think I might prefer Kremer to Baz only because he's tied to a better team. But yeah, Baz going deep in that first start has obviously a pedigree. He's going to strike guys out. I'm not worried about that. I would like, there's two, Kremer and Baz are 2 guys I would add probably anywhere where available. Kremer is right now, I think, in mid-30s. Yeah, 33% rostered in Yahoo. Baz is probably in that neighborhood. I'm interested in both guys.
Yeah, I like Baz more for the strikeout upside, but I get the team context with Kremer and the win potential for sure is definitely intriguing. I'm happy to add both for sure.
By the way, Baz actually, I'm surprised by this. He's actually all the way up to 64% in Yahoo.
Okay.
So the market has spoken, and Shane Baz is the guy they prefer, and I can see that.
Yeah. Another big riser was Yariel Rodriguez from the Blue Jays. This is the guy that I kind of poo-pooed when he was making his rehab starts because, I said he he was a multi-inning reliever in Japan before he came over. He hadn't thrown more than 4 innings in any of his starts in his first stint before going on the IL. I didn't think he had the depth to make it as a starter. He's gone over 6 innings each of the last 2 starts. He's allowed just 1 run. Has looked really good, and I don't know if this has legs. Like, I don't know if this will last, but I think you have to add him in most formats right now just to hope, right?
Yeah, he gets Arizona this week. How do you view Arizona as a matchup? Okay, I get it. It's a hard team. It's a hard team to break down. I know if Christian Walker is facing the Dodgers, I expect him to hit 3 home runs. But Rodriguez is. I'm with you on Rodriguez. That I never trusted the depth with him. I just thought, okay, I'm going to pick up a guy and he's going to pitch 4 innings, and then now he goes against that the last 2 starts. I probably need a little bit more evidence, and if I miss out on Rodriguez, I can live with it.
Yeah, I think I'm there with you as well. Edward Cabrera also picked up in a lot of leagues. He came back through just 3 2/3 innings, but that was the abbreviated nature of the outing was planned in his first start back. He had a 40% whiff rate. He was scoreless through 3 2/3 and then allowed a single and a 2-run homer, and that ended his stay. Had trouble throwing strikes. That's kind of always been the case with him. Are you interested in Edward Cabrera at all?
I'm just at this point. I just never expect him to solve those control issues. And if somebody's more proactive with him, with Cabrera, and they beat me with him, I can live with it.
I'm with you on that as well. I hope that the command issues rectify, but I'm not sure about it. Uh, what about Luis L. Ortiz with the Pirates? I wrote about him in my mixing it up column last week. He looked really good against the Mets yesterday. Has added a cutter this year. Is trading a little bit of swing and miss for strikes. The cutter is a pitch he could throw in the strike zone more regularly, and has looked pretty good as a multi-inning reliever and a starter. I put in some bids in deeper formats. He has a good start this week, and I don't know how long it lasts, but I could see maybe taking a gamble this week and seeing how it pays off.
Yeah, I like Ortiz. I tried to get him in NL Tout a couple weeks ago. Even with him maybe not having a rotation spot, I'm just going to follow the quality and think that things will sort themselves out. I didn't get him, and he since then has made a start, as you mentioned, against the Mets. He just doesn't walk anybody, and he gets strikeouts by volume. The walk strikeout rate is good, and the ERA is totally backed up by all the ERA estimators say that 2.95 ERA is more or less earned. I think his FIP is slightly over 3. So yeah, I'm in on Luis Ortiz, and also a team just there's going to be moving parts. They're a team that knows they're a year or 2 away. Maybe their relievers get traded. Maybe they're shuffling in the rotation. So yeah, be vigilant with understanding the Pirates depth chart because there could be some changes in the next 2 or 3 weeks.
Yeah. Another big ad for the weekend or for this week, sorry, was Mets starter Jose Quintana. He has a 2-start week, but he's also been pitching decent. He has a 4.22 ERA on the season. He's been pitching a little better of late. We've seen him be a guy who just can kind of go on stretches where he is just a solid pitcher who can mix and match with his off-speed pitches and keep, hitters off the barrel. He faces Washington and then Colorado at home this week. Are you interested in Jose Quintana in any formats with those matchups?
Yeah, I mean, he needs the 2 starts, and at least he didn't strike out anybody against Washington the last turn, but with just 1, I guess. But the 3 previous starts, 6, 7, and 8 strikeouts, which will help you when he gets to go twice. Just a fascinating career because he came up expected to be like I remember him being like a sleeper Cy Young pick a couple of times. He made an All-Star team in his 20s. And what he's really become is like just like a Jamie Moyer, a guy who pitches a long time, who's good. He's seldom great. And I maybe he gets the Mets. The Mets are going to tear things down probably. Or they could anyway. I mean, maybe Quintana would be of interest if he landed on the right team, on the Orioles, for example. I'd be more interested. But yeah, a 2-start week with unthreatening opponents. And I know we've talked up the Nationals a lot, but I mean, they're not the Dodgers or the Braves or one of the Indians, the Guardians, or the Twins right now. I can sign off on Quintana as a short-term guy, and I would like him a lot more if he gets traded to a better team.
Yeah. I could see that too. I think he could get traded. I think the Mets could deal some of these starters and then put Budo back in the rotation, stuff like that, and still contend. Senga coming back in the second half of the year. They could trade Severino, they could trade Quintana, and they could still fill the rotation and not be punting on the year.
That's a thing that you can do, and you can do this. This is a fantasy takeaway here too, right? You don't have to be strict buyer, strict seller if you're in a keeper league. And sometimes my partner and I, Scott Gleason, who I've mentioned a lot, the guy who bought the season tickets for the Yankees, even though for the Red Sox, even though he lives in Long Island, makes no sense. The team has surged since he bought those tickets, so he's gonna have fun selling like away half of them because he can't go to like most of those games. But you don't have to be a dedicated seller, dedicated buyer. You can like say, oh yeah, I'm buying and then sell. You go, oh yeah, I'm selling and then you can buy. And the market will fluctuate. Or sometimes in keeper leagues, like I'm in one league where one team is running away with the league. It's extremely competitive for second, but I don't know how important it is for people to come in second. So it may be more,
Right.
The market is different this year because there aren't like 4 or 5 teams who can win the league. Just don't be afraid to, you don't have to pick. It's not binary necessarily. You may be a buyer today and a seller later, or you can just, if you trade for a player who you think is a keeper and then you can flip him for more than you traded him for, then you've made your team better. So don't feel like you're at a fork in the road. You can only go one direction. Maybe the Mets can actually play both sides of this.
I love that advice, and it works, works in fantasy. It works in real baseball. It's great. Another name that's on the radar now, Andre Palante from the Cardinals, has moved into the starting rotation for the last 3 starts. 2 of them have been, the last 3 of them. No, he made 3 starts. 2 of them have been really good. The last 2, where he's allowed just 1 run in 12 1/3 innings. All told, he over the last month in 4 appearances, 3 starts, has a 2.42 ERA, 1.19 WHIP, 25 strikeouts in 26 innings. He got a 2-start week this week against the Royals and the Cubs. Were you interested in Palante in any formats?
Yeah, I didn't make the move because other than that last start, he's had trouble going deep in games, and I just like to see like 6s and 7s. He did go 7 against Pittsburgh, but a lot of 5 1/3, and a lot of 5, and it's just so hard to get a win when you don't go deep in games like that. And the Royals' offense actually is a problem. Maybe it's not deep 1 to 9, but their first like 5 hitters are pretty good. I think the Royals actually have some staying power, even though the team hasn't played as well lately. But the middle of the lineup is good. Bobby Witt Jr. could easily be the first pick overall in fantasy next year. He's what a monster year. I have none of Witt, by the way, which is no fun. So I did not get in on the. I get it. Anybody who's functional, who has 2 starts, is usually playable, but he ended up being under the cut line for me.
Yeah, I put some bids in 15 team leagues. Didn't get him, got some Luis Ortiz instead and was happy about that. And also picked up Brian Bayo in one league where he was dropped. I hope he turns it around a little bit. I think he's got a decent start this week as well. So we'll see what happens there. But yeah, some interesting names this week. We will be back again on Wednesday. We're going to start turning our attention a little bit to the trade deadline and your trade deadlines in fantasy as they start nearing, just kind of like what we can do and at what stage in the season you have to decide if you're contending or not. We'll kind of start talking about all of that in the episodes ahead. Make sure you follow both of us on Twitter. I'm at Samski NYC. Scott is at Scott_Pianowski. Please download, rate, and review this podcast. It does help us to kind of get it out there. And we'll see you on Wednesday for another episode of the Rotoworld Baseball Show.